Outside Randfontein, where I was born and grew up, are small holdings, small farms, mainly inhabited by, at that time, by Afrikaners. I'm talking about the early 1960s. Driving around there one Saturday morning, I found this scene, a family making a coffin in their garden. I asked if I could please come in and perhaps take some photographs, and they assented, they agreed. And it transpired that the coffin was meant for the black maid of the neighbor. The maid's family could not afford a coffin, they knew. And this was a most extraordinary thing to have happen. To spend a Saturday making a coffin for a black servant. It was the kind of generosity of spirit that is typical of these people, Afrikaner working people, and yet, at the same time, completely outside the expected behavior of white people in South Africa, actually to spend a Saturday making a coffin for a black woman. And as though to deny the generosity of their spirit, they were joking while I took these photographs about whether she would fit into the coffin and whether they would have to tie a knot in her legs or cut her off at the neck. But nonetheless, this is what they were doing. And I can tell you that this would not have been a scene that could even be envisaged in the leftist pinkish circles from which I came. I was on a farm in the Free State in South Africa with Joe Lelyveld, who was the New York Times correspondent in the country. The owner of the farm was a Major van Eerden, this man here, the white man. And he was talking to his laborers, to his farm workers, and this one here was his foreman, or in South African terms then, his boss boy. The Major was trying to convince us that his relationship with his workers was respectful and even affectionate. And the Major said to O Sam, this man here, O Sam, vloek die baas vir jou. O Sam, does the boss swear at you? And O Sam in answer said, nee baas, die baas vloek nie vir my nie. No boss, the boss doesn't swear at me, using the third person respectable way of addressing a senior. Outside Randfontein, the town where I was born and brought up, there are small holdings, small farms, maybe 2, 3, 4 hectares each. Most of these were rented or bought by Afrikaners who came from the land in the Great Depression of the 1930s and the great droughts that the country had at that time. This gentleman was a pensioner who had been part of a government scheme to give employment to white people so that they would not sink to the point where they would perhaps begin to live with black people. He had a small plot, and when I asked him what he did, he said, ek boer, which means I farm. His farming consisted of a small patch of corn and a few peach trees. I photographed him and his wife. She's sitting here. And as I was doing this child came into the room, this black child. They weren't in the least disturbed or upset that she did so, and she came and stood right there and sucked her thumb. This was an indication that she enjoyed the confidence to do so, and as well the acceptance by the white family, the old man and his wife and their daughter. A high degree of acceptance, because in middle-class white South Africa, where I was born and brought up, there are not many homes where that would have been tolerated. In my own home, where I came from, the children of the lady who worked for my mother were very familiar to us, and I used to carry them myself when they were babies, and we became friendly, but it was not common. And in this case, this was a degree of intimacy that was very rare in middle-class homes. Anyway, I obviously photographed them together, and the man in the picture is the lady's first husband, who was a soldier in the First World War. This is a photograph in Gamkes Kloof, or as it was known popularly, the Hell, which is a valley deep in the Swartberg Mountains in the Cape of South Africa. It was populated perhaps in the 1850s, no one knows quite when, by a group of Afrikaners who made it their home and became a supremely isolated community with very little communication with the outside world. They would farm with fruit, and once or twice a year they would take the dried fruit over the mountains, there were very steep mountains there, on donkeys to the nearest town, and they would either sell or trade their crops for coffee and cloth and the other things that they needed. Eventually the government put a road into this valley in the 1950s, I think, and this eventually led to the end of that community because the children of the farmers, and we have here a man called Lewy's Nel, and that's his daughter moving out of the house. The children went away to high school and they chose never to come back. The houses have been converted by the provincial administration and by a survivor of that community into holiday cottages, and so the valley is now really a tourist and hiker's attraction. There is a turntable playing in the picture, and on it was a recording that we all knew in South Africa, which became very, very popular in the 1960s, called "Ach, Please Daddy, Won't You Take Us to the Drive-In?" On the wall is a picture of the Prime Minister, Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of Apartheid, and on the wall on the other side, I think a portrait of Lewy's Nel, or possibly his father. I'm not sure. So here we have a photograph taken on the 50th anniversary of the National Party in South Africa. This was the political party of Afrikaners principally, who put the apartheid government into power in 1948. And these men were escorting the main architect of apartheid, Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd, and his wife Betsy, into the celebrations for the 50th anniversary. This photograph was taken in 1964, and the late 1990s. I met the man in the middle here, the man on the white horse with a little hat, and he told me that these young men were all policemen, and these horses were also part of the police force. He became a deputy minister in the National Party government, in the Department of Justice, and he became, eventually, the only senior National Party member to apologize for apartheid, and he became a human rights lawyer. Did great work. There had been a lot of farm murders. These were the murders of farming people, white farming people mostly, or all of them, I think, white farming people. And to raise awareness of the phenomenon, farmers began to hang crosses over their fences near big roads. So here is the national road between Cape Town and the north, Zimbabwe. And there were crosses hanging over the fences of the farms there when I first became aware of this, to protest against and to commemorate the people who had been murdered. However, the National Road Agency then said, these crosses are illegally there. You cannot advertise in the property of the National Road Agency. And these crosses were hanging over the fences on the side of the property of the National Road Agency, in the area between the road and the fences. So the farmers were faced with having to remove their crosses when a local farmer here gave them permission to erect their crosses on his property. So I photographed these crosses on the fences. It took me about 2 or 3 months, several visits to this area. And then finally, after those crosses were removed, I photographed these crosses on the hillside, commemorating and protesting against farm murders.